This story is titled, Fiancé Took a Break, Vanished for Weeks. Met her ex, now wants to resume our wedding plans. I'm ready to walk away. Hey everyone, before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. Hey everyone, I'm not the kind of guy who usually posts stuff like this, but things have been so weird lately that I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone out there has been through something similar and can give me some advice, or at least tell me I'm not crazy. So, here's the deal. My fiancé, Lily, 27 female, and I, 29 male, have been together for 3 years. She's smart, funny, and has this way of making you feel like you're the only person in the room. I proposed last year, and we started planning a summer wedding. Everything was going great. At least I thought it was. One day, Lily tells me she's going to her hometown to spend time with her sister. Now Lily's really close with her family, and she hadn't been back in a while, so it didn't seem weird. She packed a bag, gave me a kiss, and told me she'd be back in a couple of weeks. At first, I didn't think much of it. We still texted here and there, and she called me the first night to let me know she got there safely. The next day, though, things started to feel off. She called me in the afternoon. She was like, "Hey, I need to talk to you about something." I went, "Sure, what's up?" That's when she drops this. "I think I need some time to think." I was trying to process, so I asked, "Think about what? Is this about the wedding? Are you feeling stressed? Did I do something?" She doesn't really answer, just says, "I feel like I need some time for myself." I didn't want to push too hard, so I said, "Okay, if you need space, I get it. Just let me know what's going on." She promises we'll talk soon, but the whole thing feels off. The conversation ended on a weird note. I sat there like, what the hell just happened? After that, communication pretty much stopped. I texted her a few times, just normal stuff like, "Hey, how's it going?" Or, "Hope you're having a good day." But she never replied. I tried calling her, but she didn't pick up. She even stopped posting on social media, which was odd because she's usually the type to share everything from her morning coffee to random sunset pics. I reached out to her sister thinking maybe she could shed some light on what was going on. Her sister texted back a short, "Haven't seen her much, sorry," which didn't help at all. It felt like everyone was shutting me out. At this point, I started losing sleep over it. My friends tried to calm me down, saying, "She's probably just taking a breather." But that didn't sit right with me. This wasn't like her. She'd never been the type to just go radio silent, especially not on me. The weirdest part was how sudden it all felt. We were literally in the middle of choosing flower arrangements a week before she left. There were no big arguments, no signs of anything wrong. I kept replaying every conversation we'd had, trying to figure out if I'd missed something. But everything seemed fine, until it wasn't. I tried giving her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she really did need some time alone. Maybe she was going through something she didn't know how to talk about yet. But as days turned into weeks, my patience wore thin. If something was wrong, why couldn't she just tell me? That's when I started questioning everything. Was she really staying with her sister? What if there was something or someone else going on? I hated thinking like that, but the lack of answers was driving me nuts. I spent so many nights staring at my phone, hoping for a text or a missed call that never came. Every day that passed felt heavier than the last. I tried distracting myself with work, friends, but nothing worked. I felt like my whole world was stuck on pause. After a couple of weeks of silence from Lily, I decided enough was enough. I mean, how much space does one person need? If she wasn't going to tell me what was going on, I was going to find out myself. I packed an overnight bag, fueled up my car, and made the drive to her hometown. It wasn't a quick trip, but I had plenty of time to mentally prepare for whatever awkward or uncomfortable conversation was waiting for me. I kept telling myself, maybe she's just stressed. Maybe it's not that bad. But deep down, I had this sinking feeling that things were about to get weird. When I pulled up to her parents' house, where I assumed she was staying, my heart was racing. I knocked on the door, and for a second, I thought no one was home. Then Lily opened it. The look on her face said it all. She was not expecting me. She stood there for a moment, staring at me like I was a pop quiz she hadn't studied for. Finally, she stepped aside and let me in, mumbling something about how she didn't think I'd come. We sat down in the living room, and everything felt off. It wasn't like the usual comfort I felt with Lily, where we could just sink into the couch and talk about anything. She started with small talk. "How was your drive? Did you hit any traffic? Want something to drink?" Like she was trying too hard to sound normal. I played along at first, answering her questions with short, clipped responses, but my patience was wearing thin. I didn't come all this way to discuss the highway condition. There was this long, awkward pause where neither of us spoke. She blanked out, and when she finally glanced up, I asked, Lily, what's going on? Why haven't you been answering my calls or texts? Her reaction was immediate. I've been trying to figure some things out, she said finally, her voice soft, almost too quiet to hear. Figure what out? I was trying to keep quiet. She hesitated. She wasn't sure how to say what she needed to. The silence stretched on, and I could feel my heartbeat getting louder in my ears. Then she finally said it. I ran into my ex when I got here. It felt like the floor had just shifted beneath me. I stared at her, trying to process what she'd just said. And? I asked, my voice as steady as I could manage, though I already felt the storm brewing inside me. It wasn't planned, she said. I saw him at the grocery store, and we ended up talking. Talking. That word hit me like a slap. It wasn't the fact that she'd seen her ex. That could happen to anyone. It was the way she said it, like it was no big deal. But it clearly was a big deal, or we wouldn't be having this conversation. I leaned forward, trying to keep my composure. Why didn't you tell me about this earlier? I asked. Her eyes darted to the side, avoiding mine. I didn't want to upset you until I knew how I felt. How you felt? I repeated, my voice rising just a bit. We're engaged, Lily. We're planning a wedding. What do you mean, how you felt? That's when she said, I've been spending some time with him, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I needed to see if there were any unresolved feelings. For a moment, I couldn't even speak. My mind was spinning, trying to wrap itself around what she'd just said. Unresolved feelings? We're supposed to be getting married, and you're out here playing emotional hopscotch with your ex? I just needed to know for sure, she said. I didn't want to go into our marriage with any doubts. I felt my chest tighten, my hands clenching into fists. So you've been ignoring me this whole time because of him? I couldn't stay quiet. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why didn't you talk to me about this instead of shutting me out? She started to respond, but I wasn't done. What does this mean for us, Lily? Are you still trying to figure it out? Because I'm not going to sit around waiting for you to decide if I'm plan A or plan B. Her face crumpled, and for a split second, I thought she might cry. But instead, she said, I didn't want to hurt you. I needed time to sort my emotions. Do you even hear yourself right now? I shot back. Leaving me in the dark for weeks was a hell of a lot worse than just being honest from the start. The conversation went in circles after that. Every time I tried to get a straight answer, she dodged it, giving me vague excuses about needing clarity and not wanting to make a mistake. I could feel my energy draining with every passing minute. By the end of it, I was done. Completely, utterly done. I stood up, looked at her one last time, and said, I need some time to think. Exactly like what she said, and the way she said it. Her eyes widened like she didn't expect me to say that, but I didn't wait for a response. I grabbed my keys and walked out. The drive back home after that conversation was one of the longest and most surreal trips of my life. I wasn't angry, at least not in the yelling and breaking stuff kind of way, but I was hurt, really hurt. I kept replaying everything Lily said, trying to make sense of it. Unresolved feelings? What did that even mean? Why couldn't she just talk to me about it, instead of shutting me out and ghosting me for weeks? The next few days were a blur. I went to work, but I wasn't really there, you know? My coworkers asked if I was okay, and I gave the usual, yeah, just tired, excuse. My friends checked in too, but I didn't have the energy to explain the whole mess. Eventually, I told a couple of close friends what happened. Their reactions were a mix of shock and outrage. My buddy Mark said, Dude, that's messed up. She should have told you the second this guy showed up. My other friend Jenna was more blunt. If she's entertaining her ex while engaged to you, she doesn't deserve you. Hearing it from other people made me realize just how bad the situation was. But it also made me feel like an idiot. How did I not see this coming? Were there signs I missed? The thing that hurt the most was how blindsided I felt. We'd been planning our future together, choosing wedding venues, talking about where we wanted to live, even discussing names for future kids. And now all of that felt like a lie. I started going through our text messages, looking for anything that might explain her behavior. Nothing stood out. Our conversations had been normal, happy even, right up until she left for her hometown. It was like she flipped a switch the moment she saw her effing ex. One night, I decided to message her sister. I wasn't trying to drag her into the middle of things, but I needed some clarity. Her response was short and vague. I think Lily's just going through some stuff. She'll figure it out. Figure it out? What was there to figure out? We were supposed to be a team, and now I was completely in the dark. A week later, I got a text from Lily. It wasn't an apology or an explanation, just a casual, "Hey, how are you?" Like everything was fine. I didn't respond. I couldn't. What was I supposed to say? "Oh, hey, I'm great. Thanks for ignoring me while you hung out with your ex. The silence between us grew louder. Every day that passed, I felt more distant from her, more certain that whatever we had was crumbling. I started questioning if I even wanted to salvage it. Could I forgive her? Could I trust her again? At the same time, I felt stuck. We'd built a life together, or at least we were supposed to. Breaking up wasn't just about ending a relationship, it meant unraveling everything we'd planned and starting over from scratch. The thought of that was terrifying, but the alternative was pretending everything was okay when it clearly wasn't, and that wasn't an option. I started thinking about what I wanted, what I deserved. I realized I couldn't stay with someone who didn't respect me enough to be honest. I couldn't marry someone who thought it was okay to put me on hold while they figured out their feelings for someone else. By the end of that week, I made up my mind. If Lily wanted to work things out, she'd have to do a hell of a lot more than send me a half-assed text. And even then, I wasn't sure I'd be able to look at her the same way again. I didn't reach out to her, and she didn't follow up after that text. The silence felt like an unspoken agreement that we were done. And honestly, as much as it hurt, it also felt like a relief. So I was starting to get used to the silence. It wasn't fun, but at least it gave me some time to think. I'd made peace with the fact that Lily wasn't coming back, and honestly, I was slowly moving on. I wasn't rushing into anything or trying to distract myself. I was just trying to rebuild some sense of normalcy. Then, like clockwork, she came back. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was halfway through rewatching a series I didn't even like that much, just something to keep my mind busy. There was a knock at the door, and I figured it was a delivery or maybe Mark coming over to drag me out of the house. But nope, it was Lily. She was standing there like nothing had happened, smiling like she was bringing cookies to a neighbor. "Hey," she said casually, like she hadn't ghosted me for weeks. I just stood there, trying to figure out if I was hallucinating. Hey," I finally said, stepping aside so she could come in. She walked in like she owned the place, commenting on how clean everything was. She sat down on the couch, patted the cushion next to her, and said, "We need to talk." I was bracing for some kind of heartfelt apology, an explanation, something. But instead, she started talking about our wedding plans. "Our venue is still holding our date," she said, like we'd been in constant communication this whole time. "And I was thinking we should go with lavender for the table settings. It's timeless, don't you think?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I cut her off mid-sentence and said, "Lily, what are you doing here?" She blinked, confused, like I'd just asked her why the sky was blue. "I'm here to fix things," she said, matter-of-factly. I stared at her for a second, then laughed, sharp and cold, the kind of laugh that says, "Are you kidding me right now?" "Fix things?" I repeated, leaning forward. "You mean the relationship you hit pause on while you sorted out your feelings for your ex? That relationship?" Her face went pale for a moment. "That's over. I realized I don't have feelings for him anymore. It's you I want to be with." I stood up, pacing a little because sitting still felt impossible. "And you expect me to just believe that? To what? Take you back with open arms like none of this happened? Do you even hear how insane that sounds?" She blinked, clearly not expecting the anger in my voice. "I needed time. I didn't want to hurt you. You didn't want to hurt me. Lily, you ghosted me for weeks. You didn't think to tell me anything, not one damn thing, until I had to drive to your hometown to find out. And now you're standing here, acting like it's no big deal? It's not like that," she shot back. I was confused. I didn't know what I was feeling, and I didn't want to make things worse. Make things worse? I cut her off again, throwing my hands up. "You made things worse by disappearing on me. You left me hanging, wondering what the hell happened while you were off rekindling whatever with your ex. Do you even realize what that did to me?" She opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't give her the chance. "No, you don't," I said firmly, "because if you did, you wouldn't be here right now, expecting me to just forget everything and pick up where we left off." She looked more hurt now, but I wasn't backing down. Not this time. "I made a mistake," she said quietly, trying to play the victim. "I know I messed up, but I'm here now, and I want to make this right. I'll do whatever it takes." "Whatever it takes," I repeated, laughing bitterly. "You say that like it's supposed to mean something. But the truth is, Lily, I don't trust you anymore. How am I supposed to believe you won't pull this again the next time you get confused or need to sort out your emotions?" She looked down at her hands, fiddling with her engagement ring. My ring. I felt a flash of anger seeing it still on her finger, like she had any right to wear it after everything. "Take it off," I said abruptly. She looked up, startled. "What?" "The ring," I said, pointing to her hand. "Take it off. You don't get to keep it. Not after this." Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked like she might argue. But then, slowly, she slid the ring off her finger and placed it on the table between us. She stood there for a moment, looking at me like she was expecting me to change my mind. to say something that would make everything okay. But I didn't. I just stared back, my face set, my decision final. Is this really it? She asked. You're just done? Yes, I said, my voice steady. I'm done. I'm not an option, Lily. You don't get to hit pause on me while you figure out your feelings and then come back when it's convenient for you. That's not love. That's selfishness. Her lips trembled like she wanted to say something, but she didn't. Instead, she turned and walked toward the door. That night, I sat on the couch staring at the ring on the table. It felt surreal, like the last few weeks had been some twisted dream I couldn't wake up from. But as I sat there, one thing became crystal clear. I made the right decision. I wasn't going to let myself be someone's second choice, their backup plan when things didn't work out with someone else. I deserved better than that, and I was finally ready to stand up for myself. Lily was gone, and honestly, I was okay with that. And that is how things unfolded until now. If anything pops up worth posting, I'll keep you guys updated. Update 1. Hey y'all, thank you for your comments. It means a lot. I came to give you an update since things shifted in an unexpected way. So here goes. Alright, so after Lily's surprise visit, I was in this weird limbo. I wasn't ready to forgive her, but I also didn't have the energy to confront her again. It was like I was stuck in emotional quicksand. I didn't know what to do, so I did what any guy would do. I avoided the situation altogether and kept to myself. Then, out of nowhere, I get a text from Mia, one of Lily's friends. Now, Mia and I were always friendly, but we'd never really talked one-on-one. Her text said something like, "Hey, just checking in. I heard about the break and wanted to see how you're holding up." At first, I wasn't sure how to respond. Was this some kind of setup? But after staring at the message for an embarrassing amount of time, I decided to just reply with, "Hey, thanks for reaching out. I'm doing okay, I guess." Mia was surprisingly easy to talk to. She said she'd been in a similar situation before and knew how much it sucked. We ended up texting back and forth for a while, and honestly, it was nice to have someone to vent to. She wasn't pushy or judgmental, just a good listener. A couple of days later, Mia texted me again. This time, she suggested we meet up for coffee. I wasn't really in the mood to go out, but she was persistent. "Come on, it'll be good for you to get out of the house," she said. And before I knew it, I found myself agreeing. When we met up, it felt normal. Not romantic, not flirty, just two people talking. She asked about work, hobbies, even my old college stories. For the first time in weeks, I felt like someone actually cared about me. Not about the drama or the wedding or any of that, just me. But then she hit me with, you deserve someone who appreciates you, someone who doesn't take you for granted. I didn't know how to respond to that, so I just said, yeah, I guess. The thing is, I wasn't interested in Mia like that. She was nice and all, but I was still dealing with the mess Lily left behind. I wasn't ready to jump into anything, and I didn't want to give her the wrong idea. But Mia didn't let up. She started texting me more often, sending memes, asking if I wanted to hang out again. She wasn't overbearing, but it was clear she was trying to make something happen. I kept my responses polite but distant, hoping she'd get the hint. Then one evening, Mia asked if I wanted to grab dinner. I tried to politely decline, but she wouldn't take no for an answer. "It's just dinner," she said. "Don't overthink it." So I went. And let me tell you, it was awkward. She dressed up like it was a date, while I showed up in a hoodie and jeans. The conversation was fine, but there was this underlying tension I couldn't ignore. It was like she was testing the waters, seeing how far she could push things. When I got home, I told myself that was it. No more hanging out with Mia, at least not one-on-one. I didn't want to lead her on, and I definitely didn't want to make things more complicated than they already were. But then somehow, Lily found out. I don't know if Mia told her, if one of their mutual friends couldn't keep their mouth shut, or if Lily just has some sixth sense for sticking her nose where it doesn't belong. Either way, the next day, there she was, banging on my door like the place was on fire. Then Lily showed up at my door. No text, no warning, just pounding on the door like it was an emergency. I opened it, and there she was, all fired up and ready to go. "What the hell are you doing?" she demanded, storming past me into the living room. I shut the door, already over it. "Nice to see you too, Lily. What do you want?" She spun around, glaring. "You've been hanging out with Mia? My friend?" I crossed my arms, keeping my tone calm but firm. "I'm sorry, but what exactly makes you think you get to ask me about anything I'm doing? What makes me think, are you kidding me? She's my friend. This is humiliating." I let out a short laugh, shaking my head. "Humiliating? Lily, we're done. You don't get to show up here and play the victim. You made your choice when you walked away. So whatever I do now isn't your business." Her face twisted like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "So that's it? You're just moving on?" I shrugged. "What did you think was going to happen? That I just sit here waiting for you to decide if I'm good enough? I came back because I realized I still love you, she shouted. Too late, I said bluntly. Honestly, Lily, maybe you should go back to your ex. Seems like you're good at circling back to old options. Her face turned red in an instant, her jaw tightening like she was trying to hold herself together. Are you serious right now? She hissed. Yeah, I'm serious, I shot back. You clearly didn't think twice about running to him before. Why stop now? Might as well make it easier for everyone. She practically exploded. You don't get to stand there and act like you're better than me. If you think I'm just going to let this slide, you're wrong. I told her, let what slide? That I'm over it? That I'm over you? Not my problem anymore, Lily. She glared at me. You'll regret this, she said, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. Don't think I won't make you regret this. I just opened the door wide and gestured to it. Go ahead, Lily. Make whatever threats you want, but you're not my problem anymore. She stared at me for a moment, then stormed out. I locked the door behind her, shook my head, and finally let out a breath. Whatever her next move was, I don't care. I'm done. And that isn't going to change. Final update. All right, guys, I came with a final update just to let you know how everything is unfolding. So, after Lily stormed out, the silence felt different this time. Not heavy, not tense, just peaceful. For the first time, I didn't feel like I had to justify myself to her or anyone else. It was over, and I was fine with that. A couple of days later, Mia texted me, asking if I wanted to grab lunch. I hesitated. Mia had been a good listener when everything with Lily fell apart, but I was starting to feel like she might see this as more than it was. I didn't want to send mixed signals or make things messy. Still, I figured one lunch wouldn't hurt, especially if I used it as an opportunity to set things straight. When we met up, the vibe was casual. We talked about random stuff, but there was this underlying energy that made me uncomfortable. She'd laugh a little too hard at my jokes, lean in a little too close, and give me that look, like she was waiting for me to make a move. About halfway through, I decided it was time to rip the Band-Aid off. Mia, look, I really appreciate you being there for me lately. It's been a lot and I'm grateful, but I want to be clear. I'm not looking for anything beyond friendship. Her face fell for a second, but she quickly recovered. Oh, yeah, of course, she said, waving it off like it was no big deal. I didn't mean to make it weird. I smiled, relieved she took it well. Thanks. I just didn't want there to be any confusion. After lunch, we parted ways, and I thought that was that. But as I walked back to my car, something caught my eye. It was Lily. She was standing half a block away, leaning against a streetlight, pretending to scroll on her phone. I'd know her posture anywhere. She wasn't just randomly there, she was watching. I froze for a second, debating whether to say something. But what was the point? She'd deny it, and it would just escalate into another argument. Instead, I got into my car and drove off, pretending I hadn't seen her. Over the next week, I started noticing her more often. She wasn't obvious about it, but she wasn't exactly subtle either. Her car would be parked down the street from my place when I came home from work, or I'd catch glimpses of her at the grocery store, ducking into another aisle when she thought I noticed. It was bizarre. She wasn't reaching out or making a scene, just lingering, like she was waiting for me to do something. One evening, I went out to grab takeout. As I was pulling into the restaurant parking lot, I saw her car again, parked just far enough away to not seem suspicious, if I didn't already know better. I didn't confront her. I just went inside, got my food, and left. But when I got home and saw her car parked down the street, I'd had enough. I didn't go to her, though. Instead, I walked straight into my house, locked the door, and pulled out my phone. I texted her, Lily, I've noticed you around. Stop following me. This isn't healthy, and it's not going to change anything. No reply. I didn't expect one, honestly, but the next day, her car was gone. The days after that felt calmer, like the ghost of her presence had finally left. I didn't see her, didn't hear from her, and for once it felt like she was truly out of my life. Mia texted me a couple more times, but I kept it friendly and distant. I wasn't about to let another situation spiral. Right now, I needed to focus on myself, on putting all the chaos behind me. Lily might still be out there, watching or waiting, but I wasn't going to let her control even a second more of my life. I was done. And this time, it was for good. And if there's one thing I know for sure, it's this. I deserve better. That's it, folks. Thanks for sticking with me through all of this. If you've got any advice, I'm all ears. Otherwise, I'll just be over here, figuring out how to start fresh. Cheers.
Worthless, Aunt Clara muttered under her breath as she strode past me, not even attempting to lower her voice. I glanced up from my sketchbook just in time to see the disdain written across her face before she turned away. I looked down again quickly, gripping my pencil tighter while trying to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. I sat tucked away in the back corner of my aunt and uncle's overcrowded living room, sketching quietly during our family's monthly gathering. All around me, chatter and laughter echoed off the walls as my relatives socialized, doused in a healthy glow of wine. I did my best to make myself small and unnoticed. It wasn't difficult. I'd had 15 years of practice. "Did you see Theo's last game, though?" My mom's voice rang out loudly from the kitchen. 2 touchdowns. They won by a landslide. A chorus of cheers and congratulations erupted in response. I snuck a glance across the room at my cousin holding court over a captive audience, grinning from ear to ear. His Letterman jacket hung proudly over the back of his chair, trophy glinting under the lights. I looked back at my sketchbook just as Aunt Clara walked by again. She stopped short this time, narrowing her eyes as she spotted my work. "Still scribbling away as usual, I see," she noted in a tone that landed somewhere between curiosity and disgust. "Don't you have homework to be doing or something?" I pressed my lips together, staring intently at my paper. "I finished it already." Well, I suppose it's harmless enough," she dismissed with a wave of her ring-laden hand before walking away. The knot in my stomach twisted tighter. Her words echoed in my ears. Worthless, harmless. I knew she thought both about me and my art. Somewhere deep down, I feared the worst part was she could be right. I jumped as a gentle hand grasped my shoulder. I looked up to see Uncle Max's kind eyes peering down at me through his thick glasses. "Don't listen to her, Lila," he said softly. "I think what you create is lovely." I managed a small smile in return, comforted more by the solidarity of his gaze than the compliment itself. Uncle Max was the only one who ever bothered to look closely at my drawings. He seemed to understand the pangs of being overlooked amid the symphony of other people's noise. As he gave my shoulder a supportive squeeze before walking away, I realized this monthly gathering marked the 3rd in a row he had offered me those same gentle words. Don't listen to her. His reassuring gestures were becoming something of a ritual, I mused. One I appreciated more deeply each time. The lively hum of the party clambered on around me, but I felt cocooned by Uncle Max's kindness. I allowed myself to become reabsorbed by the strokes of my pencil, applying darker depth and definition to the portrait emerging on my page. I didn't hear Aunt Claire approach until her shadow was upon me. "I swear, Lila, it's like you live in your own little world sometimes," she scoffed, craning her neck to catch a glimpse of my work. "What are you making that's got you so tuned out anyway?" Before I could respond, she snatched the sketchbook from my lap, already laughing. "Oh, honey, when are you going to grow up?" she cried loudly, her shrill voice cutting through the din. "You can't pay the bills with silly little doodles like this." Faces turned in our direction as heat flooded my cheeks. I stared hard at the floor, willing myself not to cry as a few stray snickers arose. Aunt Clara carelessly dropped my sketchbook back in my lap and strode away, gravelly laugh still spilling from her lips. "Why put in so much effort for something so worthless?" she called over her shoulder. The words pierced my fragile pride, every letter another knife twist to my heart. I hugged my sketchbook tightly to my chest, barely holding back tears. Maybe she was right after all. "Pass the potatoes, please," Aunt Clara demanded, her shrill voice cutting through the chatter around the dinner table as she leaned back in her seat. I quietly handed her the platter, avoiding eye contact and hoping to avoid provoking another of her cutting remarks. It was Thanksgiving, after all. The one day of the year our family insisted on coming together despite the simmering tensions. My hope of getting through dinner unscathed was short-lived. As usual, the conversation quickly turned to comparing my lackluster achievements to Theo's latest accolades. Theo made varsity quarterback as a sophomore. Uncle Ralph boasted loudly between bites of turkey and stuffing. Youngest one in years. He's the real deal. A round of hearty congratulations followed as Theo grinned, basking in the glow of adoration and free-flowing wine. "I told you he'd be the star of the family," Aunt Clara joined in gleefully. "Brains and talent, he has it all, not to mention that beautiful girlfriend of his." She let out an exaggerated sigh. "My, they will have the cutest baby someday. Can't you just picture it?" More laughter and smiles of agreement rippled around the long table. I sank lower in my chair and pushed a few peas around my plate, face burning. His life did seem pretty perfect, I admitted resentfully to myself. Quarterback, straight A's, leggy blonde doting on his every word. With a dejected exhale, I let my eyes wander around the room, carefully avoiding the golden boy himself. As an involuntary reflex, my gaze landed on my sketchbook, peeking out from my bag in the corner behind Uncle Max's wingback chair. Just like its owner, tucked away, forgotten, worthless. At that moment, Aunt Clara's grating voice cut through my gloom. It's such a shame not all young people live up to their potential. My eyes snapped to hers at the other end of the table. Her expression feigned sympathy, but I saw the malice flashing behind it. Poor Lila just drifts through life. I don't know how she'll ever amount to anything meaningful without some sparks flying up in that head of hers. Cold dread crept down my spine at the thinly veiled insult. Before I could open my mouth to respond, I felt a large hand firmly grasp my knee under the table. Uncle Max subtly shook his head, silently warning me not to engage. I bristled in frustration but held my tongue. Max gave my leg a supportive squeeze before removing his hand. Well, what about David? Aunt Edna chimed in nervously, attempting to reroute the conversation down safer terrain. How's that mathematics doctorate coming along? As the attention shifted, I quietly excused myself from the table. I strode swiftly to the corner and snatched up my sketchbook, fleeing to the dark solitude of the back porch. The cold night air bit at my wet cheeks, but I paid it no mind. I sank down on the porch steps, angrily swiping away tears. How dare she? I fumed, hands clenching and unclenching. Who is she to assume she knows my potential? After several shuddering breaths, my rage began to morph into despair. What if Aunt Clara was right? Maybe I would never amount to anything. I gazed forlornly down at my latest sketch, a portrait of Aunt Edna. The intricate details in her kind, wrinkled face had taken me hours to perfect. But what was the point if no one cared? It was worthless, just like me. A warm weight settled around my slumped shoulders, Uncle Max's wool coat. He eased down next to me with a soft groan, eyeglasses glinting in the moonlight. We sat without a word for several moments, my uneven breath sounding loud in the stillness. Finally, Max broke the heavy silence. Don't listen to her poison, Lila, he urged gently. She's just threatened by what she can't understand. He tucked a stray lock of hair behind my ear. But I understand, and I believe your art means something, just like you do. Tears spilled down my face once more, but this time they were tears of gratitude. I slipped quietly out the back door into the crisp night air, carefully closing it behind me before the sounds of the boisterous family gathering could follow me outside. I shrugged my jacket tighter around my shoulders against the chill. Autumn leaves crunched under my shoes as I made my way across the wide back porch and settled onto the wooden steps. Uncle Max and I had taken to meeting here, outside the stuffy, chaotic warmth of my aunt and uncle's home, where the family parties always took place. Here we could talk freely without judgmental ears listening in. Over the last few months since that painful Thanksgiving dinner, Max had become my ally and confidant. The back door creaked open, and I looked up to see Max's tall frame silhouetted in the golden light. He held up the pleated paper bag, clenched in his wrinkled hand, and waved it with a triumphant grin as he eased himself down beside me. Got them! Had to fight off Martha for the last package. He chuckled in his warm, gravelly tone. He pulled out 2 large sugar cookies, handing me one. I bit into the sweet icing with delight. Thanks, Uncle Max. You're the best. He smiled, his kind eyes twinkling behind his glasses in the dim glow of the porch light. I know they're your favorite. I figured you deserved something sweet after all that bitterness earlier. I sighed, smile fading. She's just never going to accept me, is she? Max shook his head. Oh, don't worry about Clara. She's set in her ways, but she's all talk. He gave my shoulder a reassuring pat. Now tell me what you've been up to. My mood lifted instantly. I applied to the Ridley Art Academy summer program. It's only a few weeks. But they have these amazing classes, and... Max held up a hand, eyes widening in surprise. Applied? Have you told your parents about this? I bit my lip, smile disappearing. No. Mom agrees with Aunt Clara that art is just silly hobby. They'd never take it seriously or support me. Max frowned, leaning back against the porch railing. He seemed to be turning something over in his mind. Lila, he finally said, your art, your dreams, they matter. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise. He paused, brow furrowing in thought. In fact, I'd like to help, if you'll let me. I stared, confused but intrigued. Help how? Well, clearly, Clara controls the family purse strings, but there are other resources. He reached out and took my hand, giving it an encouraging squeeze. Let me fund your art academy tuition, anonymously, of course, he added with a conspiratorial wink. It can be our secret. My eyes widened in disbelief. What? Uncle Max, that's incredibly generous, but I could never ask you to. He held up a hand. You're not asking, I'm offering. I believe in you, Lila, and I want to invest in that talent of yours before anyone tries to snuff it out. His words brought tears to my eyes. After years of discouragement, someone was finally taking me and my art seriously. I threw my arms around his neck in an impulsive hug. Thank you, I choked out through my tears. I promise I won't waste this opportunity. Max chuckled, patting my back gently. Of course you won't. I expect a full portfolio of new pieces when you get back. He pulled away, holding me by the shoulders and gazing at me intently. Just promise me that from now on, you'll start listening to your own voice instead of theirs. Deal? I took a deep breath and wiped the remaining moisture from my eyes, feeling as if a tremendous weight had been lifted from my soul. Deal? Deal. I crept up the creaky attic steps as stealthily as I could, clutching my latest art supply store purchase. Even with Uncle Max generously funding my artistic pursuits in secret for the past few months, I still felt like a fugitive, sneaking around behind my family's back. But the flush of excitement I felt unboxing shiny new artist pastels made the whole cloak and dagger act worthwhile. I had discovered I loved working with color almost as much as Mom disapproved of my artistic dabbling, as she called it. I smiled to myself, lifting the basement trapdoor slowly. Better to ask her forgiveness later than permission now. Just as the door was about to latch silently behind me, a shrill voice bellowed up from below. Lila Grace, what in heaven's name are you doing up there? Aunt Clara's harsh tones echoed off the attic walls, causing me to jump. The pastels tumbled out of my hands, clattering down the steps along with my heart. Nothing, Aunt Clara, I stammered, scrambling to collect my forbidden treasures strewn across the aging floorboards before she ascended. My efforts were in vain, however, as her heavy footsteps soon thudded behind me. I wheeled around to find Clara glaring down at the vibrant sticks gripped in my hands, eyebrows raised. Wordlessly, she extended her palm. Sheepishly, I handed her the receipt, clutched in my other hand. Squinting through her bifocals, she examined it for several moments while I held my breath. $84.76, she finally exclaimed. You spent nearly $100 on coloring sticks? They're oil pastels, I corrected under my breath. Her sharp eyes snapped to mine. What was that? I shrank back against the chill wall. Nothing. I just used some extra babysitting money, that's all. Seems like quite a lot of babysitting, she said skeptically. And just what do you plan to do with these anyway? Before I could respond, the attic door unexpectedly swung open. We both turned to see Uncle Max mount the last step, slightly out of breath. There you both are. They're asking for you downstairs, Claire. He addressed my aunt lightly, but his eyes remained steadily locked with mine. Clara glanced between us, lips pursed in suspicion, but she merely let out an impatient huff before tossing the receipt to the floor. We're not done discussing your little shopping addiction, young lady, she snapped as she brushed past Max. Once her footsteps retreated, I let out the breath I had been holding. Thank you, I exhaled with relief. Max brushed aside my gratitude with a wave of his hand. Don't worry about her. Yet behind his casual tone, his brows knitted with concern. I sighed, sadness suddenly deflating my mood as I sunk down onto an old cedar chest. She's right, though. I can't keep sneaking around like this forever. I lifted my gaze to meet my uncle's kind eyes. Especially using money you work so hard for. It's too much, I confessed softly. Max crossed the room and crouched down in front of me, gently cupping my chin in his aged hand. Nonsense. That light I see ignite in you when you create is worth every penny. Don't let Clara make you feel otherwise, he urged. His voice took on an icy edge. And don't you dare give up. My eyes misted over with emotion. I covered his sturdy hand with my own trembling one. I won't, I promised in a whisper, as long as you believe in me. Max smiled then, a smile so warm and full of affection that in that moment I felt I could conquer anything, I paced the threadbare living room carpet, absently winding a lock of hair around my finger. The early morning sun streamed in through the crocheted curtains, glinting off the crystal vase on the coffee table. Usually the colorful wildflowers Aunt Edna lovingly arranged lifted my mood, but today I barely noticed them. "What's got you wearing a groove into my rug so early, child?" I spun to find Edna peering at me curiously from the doorway, already impeccably dressed for the day ahead despite the early hour. I smiled weakly, clearing my throat. "Just thinking about the regional young artist competition," I explained, aiming unsuccessfully for a casual tone. "The application deadline is at the end of the week." Edna nodded knowingly as she settled herself onto the overstuffed sofa. "Clara still refuses to support such nonsense." She made air quotes with her manicured fingers, eliciting a small chuckle from me despite the circumstances. My fleeting laughter quickly faded back into a grimace. "She said if I waste my time entering, I'm also wasting her money. Basically, she's threatening to cut me off if I apply." My shoulders slumped dejectedly at the memory of my aunt's cruel ultimatum from the night before. Before the defeat could fully settle across my face, I felt Edna's graceful hand under my chin, gently tilting my eyes back up to meet her earnest gaze. "Lila, has Clara ever created anything of beauty or value in her entire life?" she asked pointedly. I slowly shook my head, confused but captivated by the sudden fire in her tone. "No. Yet for some bizarre reason, she still believes she is entitled to have authority over yours," Edna continued. Her eyes softened then, brow creasing in motherly concern as she brushed a loose strand of hair behind my ear. "Promise me you won't allow her to dictate your worth, sweetheart," she implored. "Don't sacrifice your talent to satisfy that bitter, jealous snake of a woman. She doesn't deserve that power over you." I blinked back the hot tears suddenly burning behind my eyes. Overcome with emotion, I wrapped my arms around her slender shoulders. "Thank you, Aunt Edna," I whispered into her soft gray hair. In response, she squeezed me tightly, patting my back with her smooth hand. As we finally pulled apart, I caught sight of Uncle Max standing quietly in the doorway behind us. Our eyes met, a silent question hanging between us. "Well, what now?" I took a deep, shaky breath. Hope and fear dueled within me. But seeing the unwavering conviction shining from Max's gaze, I knew I only had one real option. I turned back to Edna with newfound resolve. "You're both right. She doesn't control me. I'm submitting my portfolio, with or without her approval." A slow grin spread across my uncle's wrinkled face. Edna let out a delighted laugh, lightly swatting my knee. "Atta girl!" Max pronounced proudly. He gestured to the unseen painting upstairs that he had secretly financed for my application. "Now, let's make sure they see exactly what they'll be missing out on." Buoyed by their belief in me, I marched from the room with fresh purpose fueling every step. I was through hiding myself and my art away. For the first time, I felt brave enough to stand up for my dreams, no matter the cost. I took a deep, centering breath as I pushed open the tall glass gallery doors. The familiar smells of paint, turpentine, and fresh lacquer washed over me, instantly sparking my creativity. I felt at home here among these floors and walls that showcased artistic vision instead of suppressing it. Unlike my own home, I thought ruefully. I wound through the maze of partition walls displaying the regional Young Artists Contest submissions, searching for my collection. My heels clicked crisply on the polished concrete floors, echoing through the cavernous space. Despite having captured first prize in the competition last month, the thrill of that victory had been short-lived. Oh sure, Edna and Max had celebrated exuberantly on my behalf, toasting my talent with a bottle of contraband champagne, but my parents could barely mutter a half-hearted congratulations through tight lips. Mother refused to even glance at the museum passes and tuition voucher the contest awarded me. And Aunt Clara, she had flown into such a jealous rage when she learned of my win that she stormed off in disgust, vowing to never speak to me again. Her reaction still stung, marring what should have been a shining moment of validation. I rounded a corner, and there suddenly were my paintings, a collection of vivid abstract cityscapes titled Overlooked Beauty. I traced a gentle finger down the gilded plaque bearing my name, allowing myself a small, satisfied smile. No matter their reaction, this was still an incredible honor at just 18. These pieces represented my true vision, not anyone else's expectations of what art or my future should look like. My smile slipped as footsteps echoed behind me, followed by a grating chuckle that could only belong to one person. I steeled myself as Clara's scowl appeared over my shoulder in the painting's reflective glass. "Well, it's about time you grew up and started painting something worthwhile," she proclaimed with begrudging approval. Her critical eye assessed the building's luminous geometries and brooding alleyways. "At least these I can actually recognize as art, instead of that avant-garde nonsense you usually dirty a canvas with." I clenched my fists behind my back, holding back the acid retort on the tip of my tongue. As I met her baleful gaze in the glass, I realized defending my work was no longer needed. The prize ribbons did that for me now. I simply cleared my throat and gestured to a nearby painting of a crumbling liquor store glowing vibrantly against a stormy sky. "The buildings no one else notices often hold the most beauty inside," I offered mildly. "It's all about perspective." Clara narrowed her eyes, processing the subtle meaning behind my words. Before she could supply a scathing rebuttal, however, Max suddenly materialized beside us. "There you both are. Lila, the gallery director, is looking for you," he interjected smoothly, placing a proprietary hand on my shoulder. "The mayor wants to discuss commissioning a city mural. Shall we?" He guided me away without another glance at Clara's dumbfounded expression. As we walked, I felt lighter and more self-assured than I had in years. The Aunt Claras of the world would always try to hide my shine out of jealousy. But it was getting far harder to dim my inner light these days, especially with Uncle Max so devoted to stoking my creative fire. A waiter crossed in front of me, obscuring my view of the gallery's entrance for a moment. I tracked him impatiently with my eyes as he wove through the well-dressed crowd, offering champagne and hors d'oeuvres on a silver platter. When he finally moved aside, I caught sight of Aunt Clara making yet another dramatic entrance. I grimaced to myself behind my own champagne flute. Trust Clara to be fashionably late to an event celebrating someone else's success. She glided into the gallery in a slinky black dress more suited to a cocktail party than an art show, air-kissing the room as all eyes turned to admire her. I noticed more than a few men's gazes linger a bit too long on her overly accentuated curves as she held court. "Quite an eye-catching woman," Max commented discreetly as he appeared beside me, following my irritated gaze. "She knows it too," I muttered before taking another sip. "But let her preen. Tonight is about my art, not her." Max smiled and clinked his glass gently against mine. "I'll toast to that." Any further conversation was interrupted by the gallery director's amplified voice welcoming the crowd. I thanked her politely as she congratulated me on the turnout and praised my evocative urban scenes. As she moved away to confer briefly with the curator, Clara slinked up in her wake. "Well, congratulations, dear," she purred with mock sincerity, air-kissing my cheek. "Who knew your silly little pastime might actually lead somewhere?" Her patronizing smile didn't reach her eyes. I suppose beauty is subjective after all. I resisted the urge to wipe off her cloying lipstick. "How gracious of you to come, Aunt Clara," I replied evenly instead, "since I know how subjective creative pursuits can be for you." Clara's painted smile faded slightly. Before she could supply what was surely a scorching retort, the director returned to the microphone, bringing the chatter to a close. "Again, we are so pleased to showcase this promising young talent's unique perspective," she said, gesturing toward me. "It's clear Lila has a fresh, meaningful artistic vision, one that her Uncle Max should be very proud of cultivating." Murmurs of appreciation echoed from the audience along with a smattering of applause. Clara's head swiveled sharply between me and Max. Under the weight of her glare, understanding visibly dawned across her primped features, followed swiftly by outrage. But before she could cause a scene, I stepped forward, holding up a gracious hand to acknowledge the accolades. "Actually, my Aunt Clara deserves quite a lot of credit for the inspiration behind this collection," I interjected smoothly into the microphone. "In fact, the title, Overlooked Beauty, is an homage to her unique perspective on my creative potential over the years." I turned to lock eyes with Clara, whose face had turned nearly purple. But true vision lies in those willing to look closer and nurture unseen gifts, not suppress them, regardless of popular opinion. I smiled benignly. Don't you agree, Aunt Clara? Her mouth opened and closed like a gasping fish under the weight of too many eyes and the hidden accusation in my words. For once it seemed Clara had no clever retort or searing glance to offer in return. I smiled wider. I thought so. Cheers to fresh vision. Then, I declared brightly, raising my glass. The crowd, oblivious to our true conversational undercurrents, echoed my toast eagerly, much to Aunt Clara's dismay. I stepped back to scrutinize my latest mural sketch, pencil smudges staining my hands. The city council had commissioned a stylized landscape to adorn the community center's remodeled facade. I wanted it to capture the neighborhood's vitality and cultural roots. As I reached for a rag to wipe the charcoal from my fingers, my phone vibrated loudly against the work table. I smiled involuntarily when I saw Uncle Max's face flash on the cracked screen. "Working hard as always," he exclaimed when I answered. His warm approval still caused a glow of pride to swell in my chest. "Just trying to do justice to the Irvington district," I replied, holding up my drawing to the light. "But it's getting there." "Well, make sure to take a break soon to eat," Max gently scolded. "We need to keep that brilliant artistic mind of yours fed, after all." I laughed. "I will, and thank you, Uncle Max." "You can thank me by letting me take you out tonight to celebrate properly," he insisted. "The whole family is getting together at Ambrosia, and I want to toast my world-famous niece." My smile faltered slightly. World-famous might be stretching it a bit, and honestly, I'd rather skip another tense family dinner if it's all the same to you. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. I instantly regretted declining his sweet offer, but the idea of facing Aunt Clara and her scorn even now, months later, still made my stomach turn. The wounds from her resentment ran deep. Max cleared his throat gently. "Well, I understand if you're still feeling raw, but for what it's worth, Clara has been trying to make amends lately." I snorted in disbelief. "Clara doesn't do amends." "I'm serious," Max insisted. "She knows she behaved wretchedly. Don't you think she at least deserves a chance for old time's sake?" I bit my lip, considering. The genuine entreaty in his voice gave me pause. And he had a point. Holding grudges had never been in my nature. I sighed deeply. Okay, I'll be the bigger person, but I'm not promising anything more than basic civility." Max chuckled, clearly pleased. "That's all I ask. I'll swing by at 7 to get you. See you soon." I set down the phone with a reluctant smile. One tense dinner couldn't derail my newfound creative joy and confidence, and if Aunt Clara was genuinely ready to bury the hatchet, then maybe, just maybe, it was time I did too. After changing into a smart blouse and slacks, I gave my hair a final fluff in the hall mirror right as the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, sent up a quick prayer for patience, and went to greet my uncle. To my surprise, however, Aunt Clara's perfectly made-up face peered nervously at me instead when I opened the door. "Oh, good, you're home," she exhaled, clearly relieved. She smoothed her hands down her simple black sheath. "I was hoping we could talk privately before dinner." I stared wordlessly as a contrite Clara glanced at her heels. "May I come in?"
So here's the thing. I, 37M, have always been there for my family, especially my niece. She's 13, and her mom, my sister-in-law, has had a rough go of it since my brother passed a few years back. I stepped in where I could, helped with expenses, made sure my niece didn't go without. I never thought twice about it, honestly. Family's family, right? Anyway, the day this all went down started like any other. I was heading home after a regular day at work, looking forward to putting my feet up and maybe watching some TV. But as soon as I walked through the door, I noticed something was off. My phone was ringing nonstop. I checked it and saw a few missed calls from my sister-in-law, and some messages too, though none of them made much sense. She just kept saying, "You need to pick up. It's serious," and "You're in trouble." No context? Nothing. Now, I'll admit, I brushed it off at first. I figured it was some drama with her finances or whatever. She'd been in and out of financial messes lately, and I'd had to bail her out before, so I ignored it. Figured I'd call her back later once I'd settled in. But then, maybe an hour later, I got another call, but this time it was from a blocked number. I answered, figuring it was some scam call, but then the person on the other end said, "Hello, is this my name? This is Detective so-and-so. We need you to come down to the station." That got my attention. I can't even explain the dread that crept up. It's that feeling where you know something's seriously wrong and you have no clue what it is, but your gut is just screaming at you. I asked what was going on, but they wouldn't tell me anything over the phone, just insisted I come down as soon as possible. So I grabbed my keys and went straight to the station, trying to mentally run through every possible reason I could be there. But I couldn't come up with anything that made sense. When I got there, they led me into one of those cold, sterile rooms with a metal table and chairs, and the whole atmosphere made me feel like I was in some bad crime show. The detective sat down across from me, looking dead serious, and asked if I knew why I was there. I said no, but by that point my mind was racing, trying to piece together what the hell was going on. Then he told me. He said my niece had come forward with some serious accusations against me. I didn't understand at first, just blinked at him, trying to process. But when he repeated himself and explained exactly what she was claiming, I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. She was accusing me of something I wouldn't even repeat out loud, something that, honestly, made my skin crawl just hearing it. I was stunned, completely frozen in shock. My first instinct was to deny it, of course. I told the detective this had to be some kind of mistake, that I'd never do anything like that, and that I couldn't believe she'd say something so horrible. I mean, this was my niece, a kid I'd practically helped raise since her dad passed. It just didn't make any sense. But here's the thing. The detective was looking at me like I was guilty right off the bat, like he'd already made up his mind. He said they'd already started an investigation and that things weren't looking good for me. Apparently, they'd talked to her mother too, and she was fully supportive of her daughter. Hearing that stung, but it also confused the hell out of me. I mean, why would my sister-in-law just back this up? Where was all this even coming from? At that point, I was panicking. It's one thing to have someone make accusations behind your back, but to hear it from a detective while you're sitting there in an interrogation room, it's a whole other level of fear. He kept pressing, asking if I had anything to hide, if there was anything I wanted to come clean about. I was starting to feel like I was losing my mind, like this was all some sort of nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Eventually, he asked if they could search my house. He made it sound like I didn't have a choice, so I agreed. I mean, I had nothing to hide, and at that point, I just wanted to do whatever I could to prove my innocence. But the idea of them going through my home, combing through everything like I was some sort of criminal, made me sick. After hours of questioning and waiting around, they finally let me go, but they didn't really clear anything up. The detective just told me to stay available, and that they'd be following up soon. I left that station in a daze, my mind spinning with questions I didn't have answers to. How did things come to this? Why would my niece say something so awful? And what the hell was my sister-in-law thinking, backing her up like that? When I got home, the reality hit me like a ton of bricks. This accusation could ruin my life, my job, my relationships, everything I'd worked for. It could all go down the drain because of a lie. I paced around my house, replaying the day's events over and over, trying to find some kind of logic to it all, but I kept coming up blank. My niece and I had never had issues. In fact, I thought we were close. I'd spent countless hours helping her, looking out for her, being there when she needed someone. It just didn't add up. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the detective's face, heard my niece's accusation echoing in my head. The sheer unfairness of it all gnawed at me, and I kept swinging between anger and disbelief. How could family betray you like this? Why would someone I'd trusted do something so cruel? I kept thinking there had to be some explanation, some misunderstanding that could clear all this up. But deep down, a part of me was starting to fear the worst. My sister-in-law, her behavior, her willingness to back up this lie. Something about it felt too calculated, too purposeful. It wasn't just a misunderstanding or a mistake. It was starting to feel like an attack, a targeted attempt to ruin me. The next morning, I called in sick to work, too drained and distracted to even pretend I could get through a normal day. And as I sat there staring blankly at my phone, I realized I had a choice to make. I could try to push through, pretend this was all going to blow over, or I could start fighting back, digging into why they were doing this and exposing the truth. I didn't know what I'd uncover, but I was ready to find out. After that nightmare interrogation, I was left totally wrecked. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything other than what my niece had said about me. I was trying to make sense of it all, but every thought just led to more frustration and confusion. How could a kid I'd helped so much suddenly turn on me like this? And why would my sister-in-law, my late brother's wife, back her up on something so out of line? The worst part was that the police hadn't just brushed it off after she'd said it. They were taking her seriously, investigating me as if I'd actually done what she claimed. The entire situation felt insane. I was just sitting there in my own home, my life now under a cloud of suspicion. Everything around me felt different, like my whole house was tainted somehow, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something darker was going on here, like there was some missing piece to all this I couldn't see. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a kid saying something dumb. It felt planned, like there was a reason behind it. But what? Then out of nowhere, I got a call from the detective handling my case. He told me they needed to bring my niece in for another interview, this time without her mother present. That caught my attention. I didn't know why they'd separate them, but if the police were thinking something was fishy, that was a bit of a relief. It was like a tiny crack of hope that maybe this whole thing would get cleared up. I don't know what went on in that room during her second interview. All I know is that, a couple of hours later, I got a call that changed everything. The detective sounded different, like he was suddenly on my side. He told me that my niece had admitted to making the accusation up. I felt the air leave my lungs. She made it up? I mean, I wanted it to be false, obviously since it was a lie, but hearing it confirmed was just something else. I felt a strange mix of relief, anger, and honestly, just pure betrayal. I asked him what she'd said, why she would lie like that, but he said he couldn't give all the details over the phone. All he told me was that her mom, my sister-in-law, had pressured her into it. Hearing that, I can't describe it. There's this saying, blood is thicker than water, right? But in that moment, I felt like my own family had thrown me under the bus without a second thought. My sister-in-law had pushed her own daughter, her own kid, to lie and say that I'd done something unforgivable. For what? It didn't make any sense. When I met with the detective in person, he laid it all out. My niece had confessed that her mom told her to make the accusation because they needed money, and my sister-in-law thought this would be an easy way to blackmail me. The entire plan was to force me into a corner where I'd be so scared of the damage to my reputation that I'd pay up, stay quiet, and save my own skin. I sat there, stunned, while he explained it. Every word was like a stab in the back. I'd always known that my sister-in-law had struggled with finances after my brother died. That's why I'd stepped in so many times to help. Groceries, clothes for my niece, a little extra here and there to make sure they were okay. And she'd turned that against me, weaponized it to try to squeeze even more money out of me. The detective explained that, in her statement, my niece said she'd tried to push back at first. She knew it was wrong, she said, and she was scared to do it. But her mom had told her that they had no other options, that this was the only way. Imagine that, a 13-year-old being told by her own mother to do something so messed up because it was the only way. I was disgusted. I'd always thought I knew my sister-in-law. I mean, she's family. She married my brother, and when he passed, I felt like it was my duty to step in, to be there for them. But hearing how she manipulated her daughter into saying something that could destroy my entire life, I couldn't wrap my head around it. How desperate. How selfish do you have to be to put your kid through that? The detective asked if I had any idea she might be in such deep financial trouble. I told him honestly that she'd mentioned money issues a few times, but nothing ever that extreme. She was always vague about it, saying she might need a little help, that sort of thing. And yeah, I'd helped her out before, but I had no idea she'd gotten to the point where she'd turn on me like this. I couldn't sit still. My hands were shaking, my mind racing. I kept thinking about all the times I'd trusted her, let her into my life, into my home. And now, knowing she was capable of this level of betrayal, it was unreal. I'd heard of people backstabbing each other for money, but this was my family. I never thought it had happened to me, let alone from the people I'd been bending over backward to help. And then there was my niece. I didn't know what to feel about her anymore. Part of me felt sorry for her. She's just a kid, after all. But she'd still gone along with it. She'd still let those words leave her mouth, knowing full well what they could do to me. I couldn't stop picturing her face, the kid I'd helped raise, now forever associated with a lie that nearly shattered my life. The detective told me they'd follow up with my sister-in-law, but he couldn't guarantee anything. He said that even with my niece's confession, it'd be tricky proving the extent of my sister-in-law's involvement, especially if she tried to deny it. I was furious, but also powerless. The thought that she might somehow dodge the consequences for all this made me feel sick. I thanked the detective, shook his hand, and left the station. I walked home in a daze, still trying to process everything. I felt like I was split in two. On one hand, I was relieved that my name was cleared, that the lie had been exposed. On the other, I was filled with rage and sadness. This was my family. My own flesh and blood had tried to ruin me for money. When I got home, I just sat there in silence, replaying every moment over and over. The relief of being proven innocent was there, but it was buried under layers of anger, betrayal, and hurt. I didn't know what to do next. All I knew was that things would never be the same again. After finding out the truth from the detective, I barely kept myself together. The fact that my sister-in-law had gone so far as to use her own daughter to frame me, it's hard to explain what that feels like. The shock, the anger, the betrayal, it all just hit me in waves. But at the core of it, I knew what I had to do. I had to confront her. There was no way I could let this slide without hearing her pathetic excuse for why she thought any of this was even remotely okay. I didn't even bother calling. I drove straight to her place, my mind racing the whole way. I kept thinking of every moment over the past few years, every time I'd helped her out, every dollar I'd given to make sure they were okay. And she turned around and did this? My blood was boiling, and I didn't even know what I'd say when I saw her. All I knew was that I needed answers. When I got there, she answered the door looking surprised but not scared, which somehow made me angrier. Here she was, standing there like she hadn't just tried to ruin my life. I barely managed to hold myself back from exploding right then. Instead, I looked her dead in the eye and said, "We need to talk. Now." She tried to play it cool, giving me a fake smile and asking if I wanted to sit down, like this was some kind of normal conversation. I wasn't having it. "Why?" I asked, cutting to the chase. "Why would you do this? Why would you push your own daughter to make up something that serious?" At first, she looked taken aback, like she hadn't expected me to be so direct. But then she recovered and gave me this tired, dramatic sigh. "Look," she said, "you don't understand how hard it's been. I'm a single mother, and things have been really rough since your brother passed. You have money, and I don't, and—" "Stop!" I interrupted. I didn't want to hear her excuses. "You tried to ruin my life. You told your daughter to accuse me of something disgusting. Do you have any idea what you were doing?" She crossed her arms and looked away, acting all defensive. "I didn't have a choice," she muttered, still not meeting my eyes. "You're well off, and we're struggling. I was desperate, okay? Desperate people do desperate things." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Desperate people do desperate things? That's her reasoning? "You thought dragging my name through the mud was an okay solution because you were low on cash?" I practically yelled. "I've helped you every single time you've asked, and this is how you repay me?" She rolled her eyes, which only set me off even more. "Oh, please. You act like you've done so much for us, but a few handouts here and there don't exactly solve all my problems. I needed real help." Real help? I couldn't stop myself from laughing at how absurd this was. "I've paid for groceries, clothes, school supplies, you name it. How much help were you planning to milk me for?" She stayed silent, but her jaw was clenched, and she finally looked up at me, clearly annoyed. "It's easy for you to say. You don't know what it's like, struggling day in and day out. I thought if I could just scare you a little, maybe you'd finally give us what we actually need." "Scare me?" The word echoed in my head. "You wanted to scare me into handing over money by having your daughter accuse me of something unforgivable. Do you understand how messed up that is? Or have you lost all sense of reality?" Her face hardened and she said, "It wasn't supposed to go this far. I thought you'd just pay up quietly, maybe feel bad enough to help us out long term. You have to understand, I didn't mean for it to get out of hand like this." Get out of hand. I could feel my pulse pounding in my temples. "You told your daughter to accuse me of a crime, a crime. Did you even consider what this would do to me, or what it would do to her?" She looked away again, not saying anything. It was like she'd built up this wall around herself where nothing could get through. She had no remorse, no sense of the destruction she'd nearly caused. She just kept muttering about how tough her life was, as if that somehow justified everything. "I trusted you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I trusted you, and I trusted her. I've tried to be there for you both ever since my brother passed, and you used that against me. You weaponized your own daughter to try to blackmail me. Do you even hear yourself?" She huffed, finally meeting my gaze with an indignant look. "Fine, maybe it was a little extreme. But like I said, desperate times call for desperate measures." I shook my head, feeling a mix of anger and disgust that I couldn't put into words. "There's a difference between being desperate and being cruel," I said. "And what you did was downright cruel. You tried to ruin my life for money, and you dragged your own kid into it." She didn't respond, just crossed her arms and stared at the floor like some petulant child who'd been scolded. I realized then that nothing I said was going to get through to her. She convinced herself that she was the victim, that her actions were somehow justified because she was struggling. "You know what?" I finally said, unable to hold back the bitterness. "We're done. Don't call me for money. Don't ask me for help. You're on your own from here on out." That seemed to snap her out of her sulk. She looked up, eyes wide, and started protesting. But, but what about my daughter? She needs stability. She needs a mom who doesn't use her as a weapon," I shot back. "And you clearly aren't that. You've made it pretty clear that you're willing to use her as a pawn if it suits you." So no, I won't be there to clean up your mess. She tried to guilt trip me after that, saying I was being too harsh, that my niece shouldn't suffer because of her mistakes. But I'd had enough. I told her I wasn't backing down, and I walked out. For the first time, I felt like I was actually breathing. The confrontation didn't give me any closure, though. If anything, I walked away feeling even more bitter. My sister-in-law had twisted things to make herself the victim, as if her struggles somehow justified everything she'd done. And the worst part was, she still didn't understand the damage she'd almost caused. I realized then that she didn't care about me or her daughter. She cared about getting what she wanted, no matter what it cost. When I got home, I felt drained. I thought confronting her would bring me some kind of peace, but all it did was make me realize how deeply she'd betrayed me. It was like a switch had flipped, and I finally saw her for who she really was, a manipulative, selfish person who would do anything to get her way. I didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was clear. I couldn't trust her ever again. After that confrontation, I felt completely drained. I thought finally calling her out and cutting her off would bring me some kind of closure, maybe even peace. But if anything, I felt even more rattled. It was like I'd spent the whole time talking to a wall. She had no remorse, no real understanding of what she'd done. The woman honestly thought she was the victim in all this. When I got home, I just sat in silence for a long time, replaying everything in my mind. I tried to brush it off, tell myself that I was free of her, that I didn't owe her anything anymore. But every time I thought of her twisted excuses, that lack of remorse in her eyes, something boiled up in me again. She'd almost ruined my life, using her own daughter to try to manipulate and extort me, and she acted like it was nothing, like I was the one being unreasonable for not handing over cash. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the people I know, the people who might have heard about the accusations before they were cleared up. And even though the police had wrapped up the investigation with my name cleared, there was still this nagging feeling in the back of my mind that the damage was already done. People don't just forget things like that, even when the truth comes out. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't just let this go, not after what she'd tried to pull. It wasn't enough to cut her off and move on with my life. I had to hold her accountable. If she was willing to go this far once, who's to say she wouldn't try it again with someone else? And the worst part was, she dragged her own daughter into this mess. That kid deserved better than a mother who would teach her to lie and scheme to get what she wanted. I called the detective who'd handled my case, told him I wanted to press charges against her. He seemed a bit surprised at first, probably thinking that since the accusation had been proven false, I'd want to just move on. But when I told him everything she'd said during our confrontation, the blackmail, the manipulation, the way she'd pressured her daughter, he understood. He asked if I was sure. He warned me that pressing charges wouldn't be easy, that it would be a drawn-out process, and I'd probably have to relive a lot of what had happened. I knew that, and yeah, it scared me, knowing I'd be diving back into the mess I'd just barely crawled out of. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't let fear keep me from doing the right thing. So I told him I was sure. Absolutely. This wasn't just for me, it was for my niece, too. That kid needed a wake-up call, something to show her that actions have consequences, even when you're being pressured by the person you trust most. And I hoped, maybe, it'd be a wake-up call for my sister-in-law as well, though honestly, I doubted she'd ever truly get it. The next few weeks were tense. The police had to go over everything again, take my statement in more detail, even ask me about past times I'd helped her financially. I had to drag up memories I'd tried to forget, and it was tough, but I kept reminding myself why I was doing it. I had to make sure this didn't happen to anyone else. I had to protect myself and anyone else who might have been her next target. Then, finally, the day came. The police showed up at her door and arrested her. I'll be honest, I didn't think I'd feel anything but relief, but the reality of it hit harder than I expected. This was still my family after all, my late brother's wife, my niece's mother, and now she was being taken away in handcuffs because of her own actions. But the thought of what she almost did to me, how close she'd come to wrecking my life, kept me grounded. This was on her. A few people heard about the arrest, of course. Family talk spreads like wildfire. I got calls from relatives asking what happened, telling me I was out of line, saying I should have just let it go. But I explained everything, from the accusation to the blackmail. And for the most part, people started to see things my way. Some still thought I was harsh, but others were shocked, especially when they realized my sister-in-law had used her own daughter to try and get to me. One relative actually told me, "You're doing the right thing. People need to learn there are consequences." That gave me some comfort, knowing at least a few people understood where I was coming from. The day after her arrest, I found myself thinking about my niece. I knew CPS would be involved now, that she'd probably be placed somewhere temporarily. Part of me felt responsible for her, guilty even, but then I remembered she'd been manipulated too. I couldn't protect her from the consequences of her actions, but maybe this would be her chance to see things clearly, to understand that her mother's actions weren't okay. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, it still stung. I had cared for that kid, treated her like my own, and she'd gone along with her mom's scheme without any thought for what it would do to me. It's not something you just get over. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding, trying to get back to some kind of normalcy. But the whole experience had left its mark. I was more cautious now, more guarded. Family didn't mean the same thing it used to. I'd learned the hard way that loyalty can be one-sided, and people you trust can turn on you for reasons you'll never understand. When I look back on that decision to press charges, there's no regret. I did what I had to do. I protected myself, and maybe in a way, I helped my niece too. I hope one day she'll realize that this was all because her mother took advantage of both of us. I hope it's a lesson she'll never forget. In the days after my sister-in-law's arrest, I felt like I was in this weird in-between place. Part relief, part regret, and a whole lot of anger that hadn't really gone anywhere. My family was pretty divided over what had happened. Some people thought I was completely in the right, and others thought I'd gone too far pressing charges against her, that I should have just let it slide and moved on. It was funny in a way. Everyone had an opinion, but no one really understood what I'd been through. I tried not to let it bother me. At the end of the day, I knew why I'd done it. I couldn't let what she did go unpunished, not when she'd come so close to destroying my life. And honestly, I hoped it would teach my niece a lesson too. But even knowing that, it didn't make things easier. My family, the people I thought I could count on, felt like strangers now. Going back to work was strange. For a while, I felt like I had this label stuck to me, like everyone could see what I'd been through even if they didn't know the details. I know it was all in my head, but I couldn't shake it. I was hyper aware of every interaction, wondering if people were thinking things or whispering behind my back. My boss and a few close friends knew what happened, and they were supportive, which helped, but it still felt like this heavy cloud was hanging over me. Every day, I'd replay everything in my mind, wondering if there was something I could have done differently. Could I have prevented this? Should I have been more cautious with my sister-in-law? Maybe not been so trusting? It's weird. Up until this mess, I'd always believed in being generous, especially with family. But now I couldn't help but question all of it. Had I been naive? Too willing to help? I'd always seen myself as a good guy, but I started to realize that sometimes being the good guy just makes you an easy target. About a week after the arrest, I got a call from a family friend who'd heard bits and pieces of what went down. She told me that my niece was staying in a temporary foster home, and I felt a pang of guilt I couldn't ignore. I knew she'd been manipulated, that her mom had put her in an impossible position, but that didn't erase the fact that she'd gone along with it. It's hard to look past that. Still, hearing that she was alone in a foster home hit me. No kid should have to go through that, even if they were part of something so messed up. Part of me wanted to reach out, to offer some kind of support. Maybe get in touch with her through CPS or see if there was a way I could check in. But every time I thought about it, I just felt this wall of anger go up again. I wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet. Maybe one day, but right then, the wounds were too fresh. And besides, I wasn't even sure what good it would do. She needed time to process everything, to understand the consequences of her actions, and I needed time to heal. Update. It had been a few months since everything had gone down with my sister-in-law, and for the first time in a while, I was beginning to feel like things were stabilizing. I'd put a lot of distance between myself and the whole mess, and while I still felt betrayed, I was getting better at managing it, at not letting it control my every thought. Life was finally starting to feel normal again, or at least as normal as it could after something like that. Then, one afternoon, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't pick up. I'd been dodging random numbers for a while, figuring they were either telemarketers or family members trying to stir things up. But something about this one made me answer. The voice on the other end was calm, professional. "Hello, is this my name?" "Yeah," I replied, still a bit guarded. "Who's this?" "This is Sarah from Child Protective Services. We have your niece in our care and wanted to speak with you about a potential option." Hearing that, I felt a cold shock hit me, and I braced myself for whatever was coming next. She went on, explaining that my niece had been in temporary foster care since my sister-in-law's arrest. Apparently, they'd reached out to other family members, but either they hadn't met the criteria or weren't interested in taking her in. So here they were, giving me a call to see if I would consider temporary custody. I I don't know, I stammered, feeling a rush of emotions that I wasn't ready to face. I'm not sure I'm the best option. Sarah was patient, letting me process everything. She explained that my niece's case was complicated, that she'd been through a lot with her mom, and that her environment hadn't exactly set her up for success. She sounded understanding, even sympathetic, like she knew how loaded this was for me. And maybe she did. She'd probably handled cases like this before. Look, she said after a moment, I'm not saying you have to decide right now. This is a difficult situation, and I understand there's been a lot of conflict. But as a family member, you'd have a chance to provide some stability for her, even if it's just temporary. I told her I'd think about it, and we agreed to talk again in a couple of days. When I hung up, I just sat there, staring at nothing, trying to wrap my head around it all. The idea of taking her in felt overwhelming. Part of me wanted to help her. She was just a kid, and she'd been through a mess of her own. But another part of me couldn't shake the hurt and betrayal of what she'd done, even if her mom had pressured her into it. The next couple of days were a whirlwind. I couldn't focus on work, couldn't really sleep either. The decision hung over me like a weight, making everything else feel insignificant. I kept going back and forth, trying to weigh the options. On one hand, she was still my niece. Despite everything that had happened, I'd watched her grow up. I remembered birthdays, holidays, the times I'd brought over gifts and groceries, knowing her mom was struggling to make ends meet. I'd cared about her as if she were my own daughter, and I couldn't deny that part of me still wanted to protect her, to make sure she had a shot at a decent life. I tried to convince myself that maybe, in the right environment, she'd have a chance to grow beyond what her mom had done. But on the other hand, I couldn't forget what she'd done. The accusation, the investigation, the sleepless nights and constant anxiety, the feeling of being on trial in my own life, the way she'd looked at me with that cold, rehearsed gaze, saying things that had nearly destroyed me. It was hard to see her as an innocent kid after that, no matter how much I told myself she'd been manipulated. Part of me knew she was just a pawn, that she'd done what she was told, but that didn't erase the damage. My friends had mixed opinions. Some told me it wasn't worth reopening that wound, that it would be too painful, too risky to bring her into my life after what had happened. Others said maybe it was an opportunity to make a difference, that if I took her in, I could be the positive influence she needed to turn things around. But none of them knew what it felt like to have your whole life threatened by someone you thought you could trust. None of them had been through that level of betrayal. Finally, I agreed to meet with her. CPS arranged a supervised visit at their office, and I showed up, nervous and unsure of what to expect. When I walked in, she was sitting there, looking smaller and more fragile than I remembered. Her eyes flicked up to mine, and for a second I saw a flash of fear, maybe even guilt. She mumbled a, "Hi," barely looking at me. I sat across from her, unsure what to say. She looked different, more closed off, almost guarded. It was like she'd built up walls around herself, walls I wasn't sure I could break through. But then, I realized I was doing the same thing. I was sitting there, my guard up, every instinct telling me to protect myself. I cleared my throat, trying to start the conversation. "How are you holding up?" It was all I could think to say. She shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "It's okay, I guess. Different." There was a pause, and then she added, barely a whisper, "I'm sorry." Hearing those words, I felt something tighten in my chest. I'd been waiting for an apology, hoping she'd own up to what had happened, but now that she'd said it, it felt hollow. Or maybe it was me that was hollow. I couldn't tell anymore. We sat there in silence, both of us awkward, unsure. When the visit ended, CPS asked if I'd come to a decision. I told them I needed a little more time, but on the drive home I realized I already knew my answer. I wanted to help her, I really did, but I also knew that having her in my life, under my roof, would be a constant reminder of everything I'd been through. I'd always wonder if I could trust her, if she was really sorry or just doing what she thought I wanted to hear, and that's no way to build a home. So a few days later, I called Sarah back and told her my decision. I wouldn't be taking her in. It wasn't an easy choice, and it definitely wasn't the one I'd imagined I'd ever have to make. But after everything, I needed to protect myself too. I hoped maybe that she'd find a place where she could learn from what had happened, where she could start fresh without the weight of her mom's mistakes hanging over her. It's hard to say goodbye to family, but sometimes you have to let go to move forward.
I won the lottery, and I'm leaving you, Lila. It's time I found someone who truly believes in me. The words hung in the air like a suffocating fog as Derek stared me down across the living room. My heart pounded, threatening to burst from my chest. This had to be some sick joke. "What are you saying?" I stammered, glancing at my sister Nora and Derek's friend Alex, who wore equally dumbfounded expressions. Derek's lips curved into a self-satisfied smirk as he produced a lottery ticket from his pocket and waved it in front of my face. "Feast your eyes on our golden ticket to freedom, my dear." My legs felt like jelly as the gravity of his announcement hit me. You won the lottery? And you're leaving me?" "That's right," he nodded, his eyes narrowing. "I'm finally getting out from under your doubting shadow and living like I deserve with someone who supports my dreams." The cruel insinuation of his words stung like acid. Was this truly the man I married 5 years ago? The one who once showered me with affection and appreciation? "Derek, I've always supported you," I cried out, desperate for him to see reason. "Your inventions, your business ideas, I believed in you every step of the way." He let out a mocking laugh. "You expect me to believe that? I saw the skepticism in your eyes whenever I pitched a new concept, the way you'd grit your teeth and nod along, just indulging my silly fantasies." My mouth hung open, a retort dying on my lips as my mind raced for a counter-argument. How could I convince him of something he was so resolutely convinced wasn't true? "You're delusional." Nora's shrill voice pierced the tension, her eyes blazing as she stepped forward. "Lila has been nothing but a supportive, loving wife to your sorry ass." "Stay out of this," Derek snarled at her, whipping his gaze back to me. "I'm doing us both a favor and sparing you the agony of waiting for me to succeed. With this lottery jackpot, I can finally surround myself with people who genuinely want to see me soar." As his vicious words swirled around me, stealing the breath from my lungs, the true depth of his betrayal became painstakingly clear. He wasn't just leaving me, he was leaving me for someone else. Someone he claimed appreciated his ambitions in a way I apparently hadn't. I opened my mouth to speak, to hurl back the venom he'd spewed at me, but Nora beat me to it. "You low-life scumbag," she shouted, lunging forward as if to attack, before Alex swiftly wrapped his arms around her, restraining her flailing limbs. "Don't you dare stand there and act like you're doing Lila a favor. You're just a selfish snake looking to trade her in for some young, naive thing who worships your ego." Derek's eyes widened momentarily at her outburst, before narrowing again in derision. "You'll see," he muttered darkly. "You'll all see." With that parting shot, he spun on his heel and stormed out, slamming the front door behind him with a resounding thud that shook the walls. In the ensuing silence, I sank shakily onto the couch, the lottery ticket still clutched in my trembling hands. The stark numbers seemed to taunt me. A prize beyond my wildest dreams that should have been a joyous blessing, now marred by the harsh reality of the husband who had won it. This was my life now. My marriage in shambles, my heart in pieces. All because Derek had come into an obscene amount of money and allowed it to warp his perception of everything we once had. As tears streamed down my cheeks, I felt Nora's arms encircle me from behind, her quiet sobs mingling with mine. Beside us, Alex stared off into the distance, his expression haunted by the ugly scene he'd just witnessed. This was the hand I'd been dealt. But no amount of wealth was worth sacrificing my dignity, my self-worth. Derek's cruel rejection would not be my undoing. It would be the spark that ignited an unquenchable fire of vengeance within me. He wanted to see someone who truly believed in him? I'd make sure the whole world saw Derek Jefferson for the delusional, egomaniacal traitor he really was. The next few days passed in a blur of anger, heartache, and disbelief. Derek's words continued to echo in my mind, that outrageous claim of me not believing in his dreams. The more I relived that terrible night, the more convinced I became that his insane justification for leaving hid an even uglier truth. "There has to be more to this," I told Nora one morning over coffee, my hands trembling as I clutched the ceramic mug. "Derek has lost his mind if he truly believes the lies he's telling himself." Nora nodded grimly. "That arrogant jackass is hiding something, I know it." She leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "Have you tried calling him again?" "A dozen times," I sighed. "He's not answering." "Of course not. He's too busy rolling around in his lottery millions with his new delusional worshipper by his side." My fists clenched involuntarily at her words. There's no way he's dumb enough to blow all that money catering to the whims of some vapid gold-digging hussy. Except the more I thought about it, the more it made twisted sense. My throat constricted as a horrid suspicion formed. Oh, God. What if that's his plan? What if he's already found a woman just as narcissistic as he is, who will happily live off his winnings while feeding his ego? You think he's got someone lined up already? Nora looked aghast. That's low, even for him. Jaw clenched. I dug out my phone and began scrolling through missed calls, finally hovering over the contact info for Alex, Derek's best friend from college. He always saw through Derek's bullshit. Maybe he had some insight. The line rang twice before Alex answered, his tone guarded. Lila, what's up? I need to know everything, I stated bluntly, taking a fortifying sip of coffee. Everything you know about what's really going on with Derek and his big lottery dreams. There was a heavy pause before Alex sighed heavily. To be honest, I'm not sure I want to get in the middle of this mess. White-hot anger flared within me, burning away my composure. Don't give me that crap, I snapped, my voice rising. Your idiot buddy just destroyed a 5-year marriage based on one insane, narcissistic delusion after another. You're damn right you need to get in the middle of it and tell me what you know. Another pause. Then, okay, you're right. I could picture Alex rubbing his temples as he continued in a low voice. A couple weeks ago, Derek was bragging to me about how he scored big with that lottery prize. He exhaled heavily. But he also mentioned some girl he'd been seeing behind your back, an influencer or something, way younger than him. What? I gasped, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut as the reality sank in. He's been cheating on me? Yeah, and from what I could gather, his big plan was to use the lottery money to wine and dine this chick into being his new guaranteed pay pig for life, all while making it seem like she's just this huge supporter of his entrepreneurial spirit or whatever. The mug slipped from my hand, shattering on the floor and splashing hot coffee across the tile. Derek's betrayal sliced through me deeper than any serrated blade ever could. Not only was he leaving me in the cruelest way imaginable, he was happily trading me in for the shallower pleasures of a materialistic, status-obsessed bimbo. As if sensing my inner turmoil, Alex continued in a wary tone. I tried warning him that what he was doing was beyond screwed up, but you know how Derek gets when his mind is made up on something crazy. I always thought his arrogance stemmed from some deep-seated insecurity, I said thickly, my throat burning with unshed tears. But this is a new low that I never imagined. Through the haze of shock and heartbreak, one thought began to take form, a terrible, irresistible desire to make Derek pay for the anguish he'd put me through, to show him the consequences of his betrayal, starting with the woman he meant to discard me for. I met Nora's gaze, an unspoken understanding passing between us. Get me everything you can on this so-called influencer, I stated, my voice hard. Every social media account, every fan page, anything to give me ammunition against the little harlot trying to steal my husband. Nora's lips curved into a vindictive smirk. Oh, I'll do better than that, sis. She whipped out her phone, fingers flying across the screen. By the time we're done, this attention-starved bimbo is going to wish she never laid eyes on Derek Jefferson's selfish ass. My own smile mirrored the icy promise of vengeance brewing within me. The delusion was over. Derek and his new prize were about to face the harsh sting of reality, and I would be the one delivering the painful wake-up call. That low-life scumbag! The words erupted from my lips like venom as I slammed my palms on the kitchen table, glaring at the picture of Derek grinning next to his vapid influencer fling. Alex shifted uncomfortably beside me, his expression pained. I know, Lila. Believe me, seeing him throw away your marriage for this bimbo makes me sick too. Well, we're going to make him regret it. My voice dripped with steely determination as I turned to face my unexpected ally. In the aftermath of Derek's bombshell betrayal, it was Alex who had stepped up as a steady source of support and inside information. While Nora busied herself uncovering every sordid detail about the social media starlet latching onto my ex like a parasite, Alex had filled me in on more of Derek's twisted motivations. Apparently, Derek's lottery delusion ran even deeper than I'd realized. He was convinced this cow cam model with a rapper bod, as Nora crudely dubbed her, was the only one who could appreciate his entrepreneurial spirit. The perfect accessory to flaunt his wealth and prop up his crumbling ego. "We have to hit him where it hurts, take away the two things he cares about most," Alex stated grimly. "His money and his inflated sense of self-importance." I nodded, my jaw setting. "And thanks to you, I have the evidence to do just that concerning his lottery winnings." A twisted smile played across my lips as I retrieved the faded convenience store photo tucked in my pocket, an image of Alex, Derek, and I smiling and holding up our fateful lottery ticket from years ago, the very ticket Derek was now trying to claim full ownership over. Once the truth comes out about us being partners on this prize, his plans to bankroll a lavish lifestyle for himself and his new arm candy fling are going to hit one hell of a financial roadblock. Not to mention the PR nightmare it'll cause when the world realizes what an egotistical, manipulative dirtbag he really is. Nora strode into the room, fire blazing in her eyes as she slapped a thick manila folder on the table. "Speaking of which, I've got enough dirt on the so-called influencer to make their heads spin." Sliding the folder toward me, she flipped it open to reveal a myriad of social media posts. Selfies of the heavily made-up, surgically enhanced blonde posing and pouting, her shrill captions overflowing with narcissistic hashtags and vapid catchphrases. Her real name is Belinda Stone, 24 years young and dumb as a brick. Nora's tone dripped with contempt, originally from a wealthy family who cut her off once she got too absorbed chasing internet fame and fortune to care about anything else. My stomach churned with revulsion as I absorbed the evidence of this woman's unabashed vanity, materialism, and willful ignorance. No wonder Derek was enamored. She was essentially a funhouse mirror version of himself. "We have to take her down, along with that ego-bloated pig she's parading around with," I declared, steadying my nerves with a deep inhale. "Expose every dirty secret, every con, every pathetic ploy for attention they're attempting to pull." Alex let out a low whistle as he scanned the damning information Nora had gathered. "Starting to feel sorry for these two, the more I see how sadistic your revenge is going to be." A harsh laugh escaped my lips. "Don't feel too sorry, they're the ones reaping what they sowed." Resting a hand on the folder, I met Alex's gaze, my eyes hardening. Once the world sees them for the shallow, manipulative frauds they are, Derek and his little harlot won't have an ounce of admiration or respect left to feed their delusional narcissism. A grim smile crossed Nora's face as she gave a resolute nod. "Time to watch the shit hit the fan, sis." I mirrored her expression, feeling the familiar flames of rage mingle with a deep, vindictive satisfaction. Indeed it is. Derek wanted to see someone who truly believed in him? By the time I was through, the whole world would see just how unworthy he was of anyone's belief or devotion. The painful downfall of his sickening delusions would serve as the harshest slap of reality. And I wouldn't stop until his despicable arrogance was shattered into a million irreparable pieces. This better work. The hushed words slipped through clenched teeth as I stared at the screen, watching the final edits to the video Nora had meticulously crafted. My sister flashed me a reassuring smirk. "Relax, sis. This is like dangling bloody chum in front of a great white shark. Belinda will take the bait, hook, line, and sinker." I shuddered inwardly, still uneasy about deploying such underhanded tactics. But after learning the full extent of Derek's betrayal and Belinda's part in it, any moral compunctions I had were overshadowed by my thirst for vengeance. They needed to pay. To have their deceit and shallowness shoved back in their smug faces for the whole world to witness. Nodding resolutely, I clicked the upload button, and within seconds the video began spreading across the internet like a virus. A perfectly curated look at the affluent, glamorous life I was now supposedly leading post-divorce. Strategic shots highlighted a luxurious and tastefully decorated home, designer clothes and accessories draped across every surface, even a sleek new sports car parked in the driveway with a bright red bow planted on the hood. Of course, none of it was real. Just one big, elaborately staged deception made possible through Nora's media connections and an underground production team specializing in fabricating fake realities. That smug tramp won't know what hit her. Nora grinned viciously, scrolling through the slew of comments already pouring in from confused onlookers, speculating about my newfound wealth. Holy crap, look at all the thirsty dudes already slobbering over those bikini shots. She let out a mocking laugh. I almost feel bad for how badly we're going to break their desperate little hearts. Any glimmer of guilt I felt was extinguished as I stared at the still images showcasing my toned body draped in attention-grabbing swimwear around a glistening private pool. A far cry from the modest one-pieces I usually favored. Plastering on a saccharine smile and pouty expression took more effort than I cared to admit. But playing into the delusion, putting on a facade, was the only way to make this sting as painfully as it needed to for Belinda and Derek. Because that was their greatest downfall, letting ego and vanity blind them from appreciating what really mattered in life. Integrity, honor, mutual understanding and sacrifice in a relationship rather than selfish delusion. Does this go too far? I asked uncertainly, watching the spectacle spread further across various social platforms. I mean, is there a line we're crossing into dangerous territory? Alex's voice made me jump as he emerged from the kitchen, a mug of coffee in hand. Nah, don't overthink it. You're just giving the soulless narcissists a taste of their own medicine. There was an edge of bitterness to his tone that surprised me, but I supposed seeing his oldest friend spiraling into egomaniacal delusion would breed resentment in anyone. Soon as Belinda thinks you've become the richer, spiteful ex out for revenge against Derek through shameless flaunting, she'll come sniffing around to ingratiate herself. Alex shook his head in disgust. Self-preservation is all that talentless leech cares about. Exactly. Nora stabbed a finger at the screen, where several tabloid reports were already emerging about my mysterious new fortune. She'll see this diamond-studded opportunity dangling in front of her shallow eyes and do whatever it takes to latch on. Glancing between my co-conspirators, I felt a swell of gratitude for their unwavering support and willingness to go to such depraved lengths in the name of karma and revenge. I couldn't have executed such an elaborate ruse alone. With a steadying breath, I straightened my shoulders and tightened my resolve. Whatever lines we had to cross in the coming days, it would all be worth it to pry Derek and Belinda out of their self-indulgent fantasies. Once their true, ugly natures were exposed under the harsh global spotlight, not even their ill-gotten lottery winnings could shield them from the crushing downfall that awaited. This charade would either make them face reality or completely unhinge them as their world of delusion came crumbling down. And I would be the merciless instigator ensuring that total cathartic ruination occurred. The shrill ring of my phone shattered the tense silence that had settled over the room. Nora and I exchanged a loaded glance before I snatched it up, my heart pounding. Hello? Lila? Oh my God, is it really you? The sugary sweet voice on the other end made my skin crawl with revulsion. It's Belinda. I had to resist the urge to hurl the phone across the room. Of course, the vapid leech was slithering her way back into my life, her greed overriding any sense of shame or decency. Fighting to keep my tone even, I replied, Yes, it's me, Belinda. I take it you've seen the footage circulating about my new lifestyle? Girl, yes, it's absolutely incredible, she gushed in that gratingly vacuous way of hers. I mean, those houses, those cars, those designer bikinis, you're living the dream. My lip curled involuntarily. If only this delusional bimbo knew the true extent of her mistakes in aligning herself with a man like Derek. But she would soon enough. Well, I'll admit the past few months have been... I paused, as if considering my words carefully. Liberating, shedding the dead weight from my life and stepping into my own self-made fortune has been euphoric, really. A heavy silence fell as Belinda absorbed the not-so-subtle dig at my ex-husband and her new money-grubbing beau. But her desperation for hollow status symbols eventually overpowered any reluctance. You know, I always had a feeling you were too good for that loser, she cooed, her phony sweetness morphing into undisguised envy, especially now that he's squandering away those lottery millions on ridiculous pipe dreams that are doomed to fail. I inhaled sharply, equal parts disgusted and infuriated by her blatant attempt to drive a wedge between Derek and myself. As if basking in her ill-gotten gains wasn't enough, she had to try and twist the knife more. Well, you're certainly free to think what you want about Derek's life choices. I replied coolly, catching Nora's gaze and giving an infinitesimal nod. She sprang into action immediately, keying up the prepared video files and patching through to the live feed I had routed to every major news network. Although, I continued smoothly, staring dead ahead at the camera light now blinking, I think the world deserves to hear your take on things from your own lying, opportunistic mouth. There was a confused pause before Belinda's sugary tone hardened with suspicion. Lila? What are you talking, Ab? But her words were drowned out by a deafening feedback whine as our call was broadcast on every screen from Times Square to L.A. Her perfectly made-up face, twisted in bewilderment, suddenly plastered across millions of homes. You see, Belinda, I stated, my voice ringing with furious conviction, my newfound wealth is just as much of a facade as your self-proclaimed influence over the sad, desperate fools who hang on your every Instagram post. Leaning forward, I braced my hands on the desk and leveled my gaze directly at the camera's unblinking eye. The truth is, we've all been taken for a ride by two outrageous con artists, consumed by delusion, greed, and their own narcissistic pursuit of fame and fortune at any cost. My finger stabbed viciously at the image of Derek now appearing beside Belinda, his expression one of abject horror as he realized our private conversation was being broadcast for the world to hear. This low-life scumbag you've so readily attached your vapid ambitions to didn't just cheat on his wife and mother of his children, he tried to claim the entirety of a lottery jackpot. He didn't even win alone. I was shaking with rage, but a vicious sort of glee burned within me at seeing the blood drain from Derek's face as the video feed switched to authenticated footage of him, Alex, and I purchasing the fateful lotto ticket years ago. Every duplicitous act, every underhanded scheme, every conniving lie that both Derek and Belinda had spun to feed their ego, I unleashed it all in one brutal, damning torrent, letting the truth scorch away their fragile delusions before a captive audience of millions. And as the look of smug indifference melted off Belinda's face to be replaced by abject horror, I felt a twisted sense of gratification at the fractures already splintering through her and Derek's sad, self-indulgent fantasies. This was only the beginning of their downfall. I would make sure of it. I would not rest until their hollow lives were shattered into a million pieces, paying penance for every ounce of pain and disillusionment they'd put me through. Steeling my nerves, I met Derek's terrified gaze burning through the screen and allowed a cold smirk to crease my lips. This is for all those times you accused me of never believing in you, Derek. Well, believe me when I say, this nightmare is only just beginning. The ballroom was packed, every eye locked on the center stage as I ascended the steps and approached the podium. My heels clicked loudly against the polished wood, the only sound in that breathless hush. This was it, the final phase of my months-long vendetta. One last chance to drive the knife into the rotting heart of Derek and Belinda's sham relationship before a crowd of their erstwhile admirers. One corner of my mouth curled into a vindictive smirk. They'd slithered their way onto the guest list for this self-congratulatory gala, under the delusion they could ingratiate themselves, soil their way into high society's good graces. Little did those two vapid fools realize they were the ones being played for fools. The air was thick with palpable tension as I reached the podium. Leaning forward, I let my eyes bore into the squirming figures of Derek and Belinda situated at a front table, their arrogant expressions crumbling beneath my unrelenting glare. Friends, esteemed colleagues, I began, my voice rippling through the cavernous chamber. I'd like to extend my gratitude for your presence here tonight at this annual celebration of entrepreneurial spirit and community innovation. Murmurs of polite applause spread through the crowd before I silenced them with an upraised hand. However, as many of you are no doubt aware, there exists a serpent lurking in our midst. I paused, letting the weight of my next words sink in. A vile deceiver who has brazenly perverted the symbols of success and self-made prosperity we honor here for his own ego-driven delusions of grandeur. Belinda bristled at the obvious slight, shooting an accusatory glare at Derek, who shrank in his chair like a kicked dog. How bitterly ironic that his craving for validation had turned the woman he sought it from against him within moments. You all know who I'm referring to, I stated, my lip curling with disgust. Derek Jefferson, A narcissistic, emotionally stunted leech who lied, cheated, and manipulated everyone around him in pursuit of the trappings of fortune. It was like a dam bursting at those words, the once polite crowd erupting into shouts of condemnation and outrage. Caught completely off guard by my vicious assault, Derek jerked upright, his eyes swiveling in panic. "That's not true," he barked futilely over the din, before pointing a shaking finger at me. "She's the one who never believed in me, who tried to tear me down at every turn." The crowd's scorn intensified tenfold at his pitiful deflection, hisses and boos raining down on him until his face purpled. "Silence!" I roared, raising my voice above the furor. As the room stilled once more, I leaned towards the podium, lips curling into a sneer. "I did believe in you, Derek. I believed you were a good man once, until your arrogance and greed twisted you into this delusional, hate-filled stranger before us now." My steely gaze landed on Belinda next, watching her shrink under my withering contempt. "As for your pathetic sidekick, well, need I say more than she's living proof of the depths to which you've allowed your ambition and ego to corrode your morality and self-worth?" Slamming my palms on the podium, I straightened, fury blazing in my eyes. "So go ahead, shroud yourselves in as much counterfeit wealth and materialism as you desire to mask your inescapable insecurities. At your empty, rotted cores, you're nothing more than snake oil salesmen, profiteering off lies and exploiting the ambitions of others for your own soulless gain." From the back of the ballroom, a loud cry cut through the silence. "You make me sick, man." I smirked, recognizing Alex's voice as he stepped forward, derision etched across his face as he locked eyes with the man he once considered a friend. "All this time using people and spinning lies to support your sad power trip? And for what?" As the crowd swelled around him with murmurs of agreement, Alex jabbed an accusing finger at the stunned pair. "You gave up relationships, sacrificed integrity, your entire value system, all for this flagrant ego trip of a sham empire. Well, joke's on you, Jefferson, because the only thing more bankrupt than your finances is your self-respect." Somewhere within the throng of voices condemning them, I heard Belinda's shrill tones pleading with Derek for answers, demanding to know the extent of his latest betrayal. Their toxic, symbiotic relationship of narcissism and self-delusion finally fracturing under its own weight. At the eye of the storm, Derek resembled a scared child, stunned into silence by the harsh, unrelenting reality crashing down upon him. The karmic wheel spinning payback for his inflicted unraveling. Meeting my gaze one last time, his eyes held the slightest flicker of raw emotion. Fear, betrayal, simmering hatred, all roiling together. In that moment I reflected not on the monster he'd become, but the man whose love and faith I'd once cherished. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anguish, just empty vindication. And as the roaring wave of scorn swallowed him whole, I turned my back and strode away, content to let the tides of public opinion and karma's bitter justice sweep Derek under for good, this time. The roar of the crowd was deafening as I stepped out into the marbled lobby, flanked by Nora and Alex. But the vengeful cheers and chants felt strangely hollow, like a dull thud reverberating through my bones. "I can't believe we finally did it," Nora breathed, her eyes alight with vindictive triumph. That oily snake and his cheap tramp got exactly what was coming to them. I should have felt elated in that moment. Relieved that my months-long quest to expose Derek and Belinda's sham had reached its climactic peak. Instead, I only felt numb. Perhaps it was the sobering reminder that no amount of public shaming or loss of status could undo the damage of Derek's ultimate betrayal. Or maybe, deep down, I mourned having to bury the shredded remnants of the man I once loved. A familiar voice shattered my turbulent thoughts. Well, if it isn't the mastermind herself. Derek's acidic sneer hit me like a slap as he pushed through the crowd still loitering outside, Belinda trailing miserably behind him. You ruined everything." The blonde's voice cracked with equal parts fury and despair as she rounded on me. "All that effort, all those lies and manipulations trying to claw my way into high society, undone by your sad, jealous revenge ploy." I regarded her coolly as she fought to maintain her poise, straightening her bedazzled gown with trembling hands. I may have been delusionally chasing vapid social status and wealth, but at least I still have my dignity. She spat the words with as much venom as she could muster amidst the tattered ruins of her facade. "You're a sad, empty husk masquerading as a self-righteous icon of morality," Derek hissed, his eyes glittering with pure venom. "But I see the truth. Lila, you're just as desperate and spiteful as the day I left you behind." His lips twisted into a mocking leer. "Couldn't handle the fact that I'd finally surpassed your meager expectations for me, risen above the limitations you tried shackling me. The delusional rant was cut off by a harsh slap, the crack echoing through the lobby. Derek recoiled, clutching his reddened cheek as Alex stepped forward, eyes blazing. "That's enough out of you, you arrogant bastard." His voice dripped with disgust. "The fact you're still trying to play the martyr here just proves how completely delusional you are." Derek opened his mouth to respond, but Alex barreled onwards. "You were my friend once, Derek. We had dreams, ambitions, but you let greed and narcissism consume you until you alienated everyone who gave a damn." Shaking his head slowly, he glanced over at the shuddering wreck of a woman clinging to Derek's arm. "Both of you deserve each other's vapid, hollow company, living the rest of your days shrouded in self-denial and meaningless status trappings." Alex's gaze hardened into a glare as it swung back to lock with Derek's, his voice turning to steel. "I just hope, when you hit rock bottom after poisoning yourselves on those delusions, that you remember what it cost you to throw away everyone who actually gave a damn." A tense silence fell over the lobby, until I felt Nora's hand on my arm, pulling me gently away. "Come on, sis, let's leave these sad losers to rot in the mess of their own making." As we turned to head for the exit, Belinda's voice rang out, desperate and pleading. "Wait!" She lurched forward, clutching Derek's arm in a white-knuckled grip. Just tell me one thing, Lila." Her eyes searched mine, wide and haunted. Is it true? Was everything a lie? This whole relationship, Derek's ambitions, our entire future planned out together? For a moment I considered lying to her, letting her delude herself a little longer before the imminent crash back to reality. But one look at the broken shell of a woman before me, and I knew even the slightest white lie would be too cruel. "Yes, Belinda," I stated simply, letting the truth sink in like a dagger between her ribs. "It was all a lie, just empty delusions built on a foundation of greed and ego." Derek regarded me with a mix of fury and dawning horror, as if the gravity of what he'd sacrificed was just starting to take hold. But I felt no pity, no sorrow, only the faintest twinge of lamentful nostalgia for the man whose potential had led me to fall for him once upon a time. Lacing my fingers through Nora's, I guided us past the dissolving wreckage of Derek and Belinda's sham relationship without a second glance. As the revolving doors closed behind us, I steeled myself for the new chapter awaiting me beyond this painful era. Stripping the scales of delusion from my eyes was just the start of a long journey towards rediscovering my self-worth and independence. But at least now I could begin that path unburdened by the hollow shackles of arrogance and lies that had dragged me down for far too long. Chapter 8. New Beginnings. 6 months later, I stood in the shadow of the gleaming high-rise that housed my new business headquarters and took a deep, contented breath. The brisk spring air was a welcome tonic, a sensory reminder of the fresh start and rebirth I was finally allowing myself after so many months of being bogged down in darkness and anger. "Can you believe this place, sis?" Nora looped her arm through mine, her eyes shining with pride as she surveyed our newly established empire. All stemming from that vindictive little revenge scheme that put that douchebag Derek in his place. My lips quirked into a small smile. In the aftermath of my very public dismantling of my ex-husband's rampant delusions, the settlement I received from our divorce proceedings, coupled with my share of the lottery winnings, had afforded me ample opportunity to invest in new ventures. And with Nora's marketing and branding genius as my co-pilot, we rapidly transformed that influx of cash into a burgeoning multimedia corporation dedicated to empowering women who'd suffered at the hands of greedy, self-serving men like Derek. It was strangely fitting, really, allowing the ashes of my former marriage to smolder and ignite the flames of a new, self-made legacy. A firm rebuttal to the notion I had ever tried to stifle Derek's dreams and ambitions. The guy was a delusional, narcissistic train wreck from day one. I just happened to be the one miraculously cashing in on the fallout. You know Alex is still reeling over us donating a chunk of our launch capital to his counseling program for disadvantaged youth. Nora shook her head in amazement. Guy was practically in tears when he found out. He deserves it, I stated simply, squeezing her arm. God knows he endured enough turmoil sticking by us through the darkest stretches of that whole sordid mess with Derek and Belinda. A twisted smirk crossed my lips as I recalled the high-profile legal battle erupted when Alex contested the lottery winnings. Derek's snarling, bombastic attempts to claim the whole jackpot for himself were swiftly shut down by a mountain of authenticated evidence and a restraining order. Meanwhile, Belinda's desperate gambit to sue me for defamation and emotional damages imploded before it even left the ground after the avalanche of receipts I produced, exposing her as a shameless con artist and grifter only out for self-gain. By the time the dust settled, she and Derek were both pariah, bankrupted by legal fees and public scrutiny into their grifting ways. The power couple delusion was shattered utterly, and through it all, Alex remained a steady, supportive ally through the darkest days. A true friend who never judged, only encouraged me to channel the vindictive anger into something constructive. That thought made my steps lighter as I strode into the towering lobby, drinking in the sights and sounds of my creation coming to life. Just off the polished marble floors, a cluster of women from our marketing team huddled around a television monitor, eagerly reviewing edits for our latest female empowerment campaign. "Looking amazing, ladies," I called out, eliciting a chorus of cheers and warm greetings. Behind the front desk, my new assistant looked up and waved, crisp and professional on the outside, with the soul of a fearless fighter against injustice. That was the foundation Nora and I were determined to establish, a blazing torch to illuminate every dark path other women might tread on their quest for rebirth and renewal. As I rode the elevator upwards, my mind drifted back to those dark days when Derek's callous betrayal had nearly broken me. If someone had told me then about the self-made phoenix I would emerge as down the line, I might have laughed at the absurdity of it. Yet here I was, at the precipice of an empire built from the ashes of delusion and deceit. An unstoppable force, fueled by a simple credo: never let ego, complacency, or the agendas of others blind you to your own potential and self-worth. The doors slid open to reveal my corner office awaiting, a sprawling sunlit sanctuary of inspiration and possibility. Striding to the floor-to-ceiling windows, I let my gaze roam across the endless cityscape sprawled out below. This life, this invigorating hustle and soaring ambition, it was the polar opposite to the empty, vapid delusions Derek once accused me of stunting. And in that moment, I felt pity for him more than anything. An eternity confined to his own narcissistic hell while I flourished in the light. That was the ultimate revenge. As I settled into my plush leather chair, the phone began ringing shrilly, jarring me from my reverie. With a self-assured smile, I scooped up the receiver. "Lila Jefferson," I answered crisply. "Let's get to work."